So I've heard when you turned 18 and went to college, you did so with the thought that you'd never move back to Maine. Liz, in a nutshell, tell us what the United Way of Southern Maine does.
United Way mobilizes the community to tackle the biggest issues of the day. And those are the most urgent, pressing issues, but also the long-term issues that are holding us back.
I'd like to welcome our listeners to the Boulos Beat podcast. I'm your host, Greg Boulos. Boulos Company is Northern New England's largest commercial real estate services firm, with offices in Portland, Maine, as well as Manchester and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We've been selling and leasing real estate in Maine and New Hampshire since 1975. This podcast is designed to provide insight into Maine's leaders, movers, and shakers. And speaking of leaders, I'd like to welcome Liz Cotter-Schlax to the Boulos Beat. Liz assumed leadership of the United Way of Southern Maine, formerly Greater Portland United Way, in 2015. As president and CEO, she guides the United Way strategies to improve people's lives through long-lasting community change in the areas of education, financial stability, and health. Liz serves on the boards of directors of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce, the Portland Provident Association, and Mayo Street's Arts. She's a member of the Maine Medical Center Planning and Program Committee and was a participant in the 2017 John T. Gorman Fellowship Program. She was honored to be named a 2019 Maine Biz Woman to Watch. Liz grew up in Waterville, attended Waterville High School, and holds a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from Harvard University and a Master of Business Administration from Columbia University. Liz and her husband, Michael, have 2 teenage daughters. Well, welcome, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on the Boulos Beat. I think this is going to be an interesting interview.
Pleasure to be here, Greg. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Liz, you grew up in Waterville, Maine, went to Waterville High School, and I assume you've been to Waterville in recent years and seen the transformation of downtown Waterville. What's your biggest takeaway of Waterville now versus when you grew up?
It has changed a lot, and I think it's amazing. I love going back to Waterville and seeing the changes. What I think is really exciting about it is the connection between the college and the community, which I know from experience and from my family's engagement that has been something that has been really important to the community and to Colby for all these years, and to see it come to fruition and see the sort of deep embeddedness of community in Colby and Colby in community is super exciting for me to see, and I'm just thrilled with what's going on there. I love what's happening with how they've transformed the mills. I love the businesses that are growing in Waterville. I love the restaurants that are taking root. It's an exciting place to visit, and I love going back.
And you know a little bit about Colby because your father, Bill Cotter, was president of the Colby College. I'm not sure what years, but back when you were growing up, I assume.
Yeah, he was president for 21 years. So it was my whole childhood, experience was really growing up in Waterville at Colby.
And he was known to be an effective leader, and I understand he just passed away.
He did. He died in March, on his birthday, actually. He died on his 87th birthday after just a truly amazing life. He just got to do so many wonderful things, and he was living life to its fullest up until the very end.
So he was active and healthy?
Very active, and until just a couple months before he died, he was walking 5 miles a day. He was teaching classes on the most recent term of the Supreme Court, so he changed his class every year because he had to talk about the recent cases. He was, all the way up. He taught his last class in February, and he died in March. Wow. So he was very active right up to the end.
That's the way to go.
It is. He had an amazing life, and I was very, very lucky to be his daughter and to be with him in those final months too.
Did you grow up on the campus?
I sure did. Yep, I lived right. So we moved to Waterville when I was in 3rd grade, and I lived on campus all the way up till I graduated from high school.
Did you sneak out to any of the parties?
I won't comment on this video for that.
We'll take that as easy. So I've heard when you turned 18 and went to college, you did so with the thought that you'd never move back to Maine.
I did, yeah. I mean, I didn't, first of all, I think it was a pretty classic response of like this, I want to see all these big cities and do all these exciting things, and Waterville's not a very exciting place, so I'm getting out of here, that kind of attitude. So I didn't expect to come back. And then when I was older and I was wiser and I started having the perspective of like, whoa, it would be really nice to be raising my kids in Maine, or it'd be really nice to be living there. I didn't think it was possible at that point, because there was all my friends from high school and whatnot were talking about, yeah, I'd love to go back to Maine, but there are no jobs available for professionals, or certainly not professional couples. You could never find 2 jobs in Maine. So it seemed like, a very distant wish to be able to do it. So at first I didn't want to come back. And then very soon, in my 20s, I realized what a great thing I had. And I did want to come back, but I didn't think it was possible.
So subsequent to receiving a BA in sociology from Harvard, you received an MBA from Columbia University?
I did.
And you went to Columbia right after Harvard, or did you work in between?
No, I worked in between.
Huh. And sometime after college, you moved to Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So was that before going to Columbia?
It was. So, so you want the whole
Yeah, Madison's a great town.
I loved Madison.
My sister lives out there.
Yeah, I've lived in some awesome places,
the 4 lakes
honestly.
there.
Yeah, it's great. Farmers Market and the lakes and the university. My husband was in grad school, and that's why we were in Madison. We met when he was in the middle of grad school, and I was living in Washington, D.C. at that time, working for a nonprofit, and he was in grad school at Madison, and we met and did the distance thing for a while. And then since I was mobile, because I had a job, and he was not, because he was in grad school, I moved out there while he finished up his PhD. And so we were there, and then when he finished, it was my turn to go to grad school, and then we moved to New York for my MBA.
And somewhere along the way, you worked for a for-profit company, John Deere.
I did. So after my MBA, I joined John Deere's MBA recruitment program, and was in marketing and strategy areas at John Deere for about 7 years, and had the opportunity to live not only in Iowa and North Carolina, but also in Germany. And so we had 2 years in Germany, and my younger daughter was born there, actually. So amazing experience.
So
with
she
that
got dual citizenship?
She does not. We would have had to have been in Germany for 7 years before she was born for her to have gotten citizenship. So but it was an incredible experience for our family. Both of us were working for John Deere at that time over in Germany.
So what's the biggest difference from your perspective between working for a for-profit company and working for a nonprofit?
Resources.
Money.
Yeah, money. I honestly, especially, and I haven't worked at another type of company, but John Deere's employees are just as passionate about the work that they do and the farm equipment that they sell and the way that they produce food for the world. They're just as passionate about that work as I am about my work with nonprofit organizations. So I don't think there's a difference there. And smart, capable people, strategic thinkers, I don't think there's a difference there. I did not find, to be honest, I had worked in the nonprofit sector before I went to business school. And I had this sort of vision, and I worked for United Way in Madison back at that time. And so I worked very closely with the corporate sector. And so I always saw these corporate people and I thought, wow, it must be like so much more strategic, or they must be like, much smarter in the corporate sector. And I want to go try that sometime and see what it's like over on the other side. And I went and I loved it, and it had the same challenges that we had in the nonprofit sector, but it had a lot more resources to deal with those challenges. So when you realize that, we need some more salespeople in order to be able to sell this product, it seemed to me to be a much easier way to find the resources to hire those additional salespeople then, when we know we need more fundraisers at United Way, we kind of shake our heads and say, yeah, we sure do, don't we? That would be great. So that resource difference was really the biggest difference that I saw.
What did you do there at John Deere?
I was in marketing and strategic planning.
Okay.
So my last job, my job in Germany was actually an amazing opportunity. I was in combine product planning. So combine harvesters, giant equipment, cost $500,000. And there were at that time, I think there still are, 4 combine factories around the world.
John Deere combine?
John Deere in Germany, in the US, in Brazil, and in China. And I worked for the factory managers of all 4 of those to put together the combine product plans based on the needs of the various markets. And so I got the opportunity to travel to all those locations. And most of my work was in Germany, but working on the former Soviet states. So I was in Russia and Kazakhstan and Ukraine doing combine product planning there. So it was amazing. But those kinds of strategic, I did a project, actually when I lived in North Carolina with John Deere, I did a project working on looking at going, like John Deere sells lawn equipment in Lowe's and Home Depot in the United States. That was a humongous decision to go into the mass channel. For John Deere, that was a very,
because they have distributors.
They have dealers, yes, all over the world. And that they hadn't done the mass channel like that before. So that was a very big decision to do. And so we were looking at doing that in Europe as well. And so do we want to start selling lawn equipment in Europe? And so I was on a project assessing that and, sort of looking at the Lowe's and Home Depots of various countries in Europe as well to do that sort of thing.
Do you speak German? Or?
I do not. I had pretty pitiful German when we left, and that was the best that it ever got. I worked in English all day. I spoke English at home. So it was restaurants and grocery stores and the few German friends. My kids were in daycare, so we got to know German families.
Kids probably picked it up.
Oh, my older daughter was totally bilingual. She was 4 when we left.
Amazing.
So she was our speaker. My younger daughter was just learning to speak when we left Germany.
Okay.
So she understood it all. She was in daycare all day, and her teachers spoke to her in German all day. But
kids pick up a second language.
Oh my gosh, it was incredible. Yeah.
So you applied for and were hired as president and CEO of the United Way of Southern Maine. Were you looking to come back to Maine? Or did the United Way present an opportunity for you and Michael, and you said, hey, let's move back to Maine?
Definitely both. So I was still in that kind of mindset of it's going to be really hard for us to find an opportunity to come back to Maine. We had been looking and thought we wanted to come to New England. My parents were in New England, and my husband grew up in the Chicago area, but his parents had also moved to Maine. So his parents were in Maine, my parents were in Massachusetts, and so having all the grandparents in New England made it, just really enticing to come back here.
Because you like your in-laws.
Because we
You like your in-laws.
did, yes. They're amazing people, and it had been such a wonderful experience. We lived near that when we lived in the Midwest. They were in the Chicago area, and we got to see my husband's parents a lot that way. And my parents traveled a lot, so they came to see us a lot in the Midwest. But getting older, both of them now in New England, it really was very enticing. But we thought our kids are starting to get to the age where we don't want to move. We don't want to have some hard transitions in the older years, and that was a decision we made as a family. So it was kind of coming to the end of the window where it would be possible. And we looked occasionally, but didn't really see anything that made sense. But then, actually, a friend of mine texted me the day the news broke that the CEO here was leaving, which was July 4th weekend of 2014, because I was visiting my parents in Massachusetts when the text came through. And by Christmas, we were moved we were moved to Maine, and so that was an opportunity with what was United Way of Greater Portland at the time, and I was coming from United Way in Des Moines, Iowa. So it was a pretty natural transition in terms of, this is my third United Way I've worked for. I said I started at United Way in Madison, Wisconsin before I went to business school. Then I went to John Deere. Then I went back to United Way in Des Moines, and then had the opportunity to come here.
But Michael also got a job here, your husband.
He did not. So at that point, the opportunity was just so perfect, and he was willing to.
He said, "We'll figure it out."
Figure it out. But so this was. So he had worked for John Deere. He's a mechanical engineer, so he was a perfect John Deere natural employee. And he had worked for John Deere for about 10 years at that time, 12 years, I guess. And so he was working on some projects, and he thought, when I tell my boss that I'm moving to Maine, I'm sure they'll keep me for a few months to finish these projects that I'm working on, and then that'll be it. And he went in and told his boss, we're moving to Maine, and his boss said, well, let's just keep going and see how it works. And here we are 9 years later, and he's still working for John Deere from from all remote the whole time. And so when COVID came, and he was used to being alone with the dog in the house all day, and he had 2 daughters and a wife with him all day. That was a big change for him.
Did his stress level go up?
I think it probably did, yeah. But he really enjoyed. He is a very classic engineer, and he does like to work by himself, and so he was perfectly content working by himself at home all day. So we kind of rained on his parade, but he got used to us, and I think he kind of misses us now that he's back.
Yeah, I'm sure he does.
Alone at home.
Liz, in a nutshell, tell us what the United Way of Southern Maine does.
United Way mobilizes the community to tackle the biggest issues of the day, and those are the most urgent, pressing issues, but also the long-term issues that are holding us back. And what's really essential about that mission, what's really essential about our name, why we're called what we are, is that mobilizing, that bringing people together to solve problems together. If somehow we could magically wave a wand and fix whatever issue, we would not be living our mission. It's about the community taking on the issue together and solving it together, bringing all the resources of the community, whether that's talent, ideas, inspiration, resources, volunteer time, all of that. How do we put that all together to have the best outcomes for our community?
And you do that through collecting money from the community and then redistributing it?
We do it in a number of different ways. And so, yes, a very large portion of that is, and what many people know us for, is our annual fundraising campaign. And so that is one way that we bring the community together to tackle problems together, is through a united fundraising campaign every year. And we're privileged to have some of the best minds in our community engaging in that work. This year, our campaign chair is Essie Sang, who is CEO of Tate's Bake Shop, the most delicious cookies there are. And next year, our campaign chair will be Steve Smith of LL Bean. So we have the most amazing leaders in our community who are willing to be campaign chairs for us. And we have, tens of thousands of individuals who engage, 10,000 individuals who engage as donors in our campaign. And some of those people are, giving 50 cents a week out of their paycheck, and some of those people are giving $5,000 a week. It's really dependent on what people feel like they can give. And through that combined effort, we raise this community pool of funding that volunteers, because United Way is completely volunteer driven and led. We really value that tremendously. Our volunteers make those really difficult funding decisions because we never have enough money to fund the amazing proposals that we get from organizations in the community. So we have volunteer committees that read those proposals and take the resources that the community has given and invest those dollars where they're going to have the greatest impact in our community with the most pressing needs. So that is a huge part of what we do. We also do other initiatives that I would say we lead a little more directly than that funding process. So right now we are privileged to host, for example, 2 of the homeless hub coordinators for the state, statewide initiative launched by the state. We applied for the funding to be able to host those staff members, and those 2 wonderful leaders in the Portland region and Cumberland County and in the Mid-Coast region are pulling together all the homeless service providers, cities and towns, county, all the people who are invested and working on the issue of homelessness, bringing them all together again to address long-term chronic homelessness. So it's initiatives like that where United Way can mobilize experts and resources and align the efforts to address problems that is not, I would say, is a different type of work that we do besides funding agencies who are doing great work on their own, if that makes sense. Yep. So we do our own work as well. We have a few other initiatives that we lead in that same manner of bringing invested partners together to tackle issues together. One of those is the Greater Portland Workforce Initiative, which is a fantastic collaboration between employers and nonprofits and government agencies that serve people who have the hardest time getting jobs, people who have barriers to work. They might be people who are recovering from substance use disorder. They may be people who have just come out of prison. They may be people who have language barriers. They may be people who have, other types of challenges that make it hard for them to find employment. But we have employers who are looking for employees, and if we can oftentimes just provide a little bit of support for those employees to get them over some hump, then they can be very successfully employed for the long term with those employer groups. So one really successful program that we've done in that area is a bridge program to a CNA job, a nursing assistant job that, not only do all the hospitals just continuously need CNAs, but nursing homes and other care facilities. It's just a very important job that serves throughout our community in so many ways. And so enabling people, primarily, the people that we've been working with in that program primarily had language barriers. And understanding the technical language that they would need, that they would come in contact with in a hospital setting, for example, was preventing them from being able to pass that exam to get into the CNA program. But once they got into the CNA program, they were fine and able to be trained to be CNAs and employed. So it's that kind of work that the Greater Portland Workforce Initiative does is really help match employer needs with employees who need employment, and what's that secret sauce in the middle that we can help people get over that hump to be able to be part of the workforce in the way they want to be.
So let's say somebody gives the United Way a donation, call it $1,000.
Yep.
What percentage of that goes to the programs versus overhead? So
our overhead rate is very low. Some, including me, think it's probably too low. We're running at about 14% overhead, right. And the rest of the funding goes to programs. And we take that very seriously because we know, like in any business, you got to spend money to make money or whatever. Like we have to invest in our staff, in our technology, in all the things that any business needs to do in order for us to do our work really effectively. We take that very seriously of we've got to spend money, but we also know that the dollars that we are most passionate about spending are the dollars that go toward program and toward really having community impact. So we're always weighing that balance very carefully inside our walls. And I'm very proud of what we accomplished there, but frankly, I do think that we're probably underspending on the.
What would you say the range is on United Ways across the country in terms of that percentage?
Well, I think the average is somewhere around 20%. So we're a little bit low on that. The Better Business Bureau says anything below 35%, I think, is appropriate for overhead. So and some organizations need to run more than that for various reasons. They have very capital intensive or very technology intensive or other things that cost a lot of money. So it is an important thing for people to look at. But honestly, I think sometimes people look at that number because they don't know how else to evaluate nonprofits, and that's a way to do it. It is a way, and particularly
But it's not the only way.
It is not the only way, and I think we've worked really hard. All of our work is geared toward driving community change that's measurable, and so we've really tried to change the narrative about let's talk about impact and results more than we're talking about efficiency, because efficiency is incredibly important, don't get me wrong, but we don't exist to be efficient. We exist to have results in the community. We want to do it efficiently, but we want to have results.
Well, nonetheless, though, that 14% shows that you're running a lean machine.
It is. Yeah, we're proud of that.
So not too long ago, the United Way of Greater Portland merged with the United Way of York County
Yes.
to form the United Way of Southern Maine. What was the thinking behind that move, and how's it going?
So I'll start with the second question first. It's going really well. It was definitely the right thing to do for a lot of reasons, and that sort of gets to the first part of the question is like, why did we do this? So first of all, we're really lucky that United Ways across the country, while each of us is local and independent, each of us has our own board, each of us has our own fundraising, each of us frankly has our own priorities, but all of that is within a pretty structured framework. So all of us work on the areas of education, financial stability, and health. All of us adhere to a very strict list of guidelines of how we manage our finances, how we interact with our constituents, our agencies, and our partners and our donors. And so we know that going in, that it's going to be an organization that is well run, that adheres to very strict standards, that is doing community impact work in the same areas that we are. So there's all this sort of like potential overlap. And as we saw, as our community grows and changes, so many people are driving over this arbitrary line of the border between Cumberland County and York County every single day. So our donors work in one place, live in another. Our agency partners may have offices in both places, or they may only have one office, but they're serving clients from across the whole footprint. So we realized that this line was quite arbitrary and was in fact probably hindering our ability to do the best work in community. And so if we said we're only accepting applications from agencies doing work in Cumberland County, in some cases we were forcing wonderful nonprofit organizations to have to like carve out a small portion of the people they were serving and apply for funding only for them. And no, you can't fund this other person who's literally in the same classroom as them or whatever. Like, it wasn't making sense. And so obviously we also expected that there would be the opportunity to leverage each of our strengths and talents without all of the duplication of two different technology systems and two different HR and all of that stuff. So we did not do it for cost-saving reasons.
Did you find cost savings?
We're finding some in certain areas, but there's so much opportunity to do great work that we certainly are able to reinvest those dollars in a very productive manner. So, there are a lot of people who don't know about United Way who we think would be wonderful donors and partners. So we, we certainly didn't reduce our fundraising staff, for example, when we combined organizations, because there are so many more people that we need to talk to and partner with. But we have found it really interesting and exciting as well on not only those new opportunities to connect with people, but we also have seen just some great opportunity for our nonprofit partners to look more broadly at their footprint and how they could be doing programmatic work more broadly or differently, which has been cool too.
So you combined two boards.
We did.
And then you skinnied up the boards.
We did, and you were part of this process, so you know all about it.
I was terming off, so
Yeah.
I was easy. But how do you? I mean, was that difficult? I mean, how do you skinny up the boards?
Well, it wasn't difficult for us because we intentionally wrote in our bylaws of this newly formed organization. We gave ourselves enough of a cap on the size of the board that we didn't have to tell anybody to leave. We wanted all the board members to come together. And yes, that is a large board, but United Way always has a large board because, as I said, volunteers are absolutely essential to the work that we do. We have so many committees.
Approximately how many people on the board?
30.
That's a big board.
It is a big board, but honestly, and people say that, but we need 30 when we look at the committees that we have, because otherwise, if we didn't have 30 board members, if we had 15, everybody would be serving on 2 committees. And that's too much. The people that we try to get on our board are people who are really busy, frankly, people who are leaders in their field, whether that be business, whether that be government, nonprofit, whatever it is, wherever they are, that they are a key leader in that area and they can bring that expertise and those networks to us. But those people are extremely busy, and we want them to actually dig deep into a committee. Everyone has to serve on a committee, so we want you to be on a committee, dig deep, give us your best thinking, give us your work on that committee, come to 5 board meetings a year. But if Greg, if I had asked you to do that work and had asked you to be on 2 committees with double the amount of work that you had, I suspect someone, maybe you or others like you, would have said, I just can't give it that much time given all my others. So for us, having a board that large allows us to hold our board members accountable to actually being deeply involved. You have to serve on a committee, but we're not going to make you serve on 2. We're going to get the work done that the organization needs and get your best thinking and your brain power and not make it too taxing.
So for all the reasons that you stated, for the good reasons for combining
Yep.
2 agencies, do you see yourself doing that with other agencies?
It's hard work, and I think where it becomes evident when it makes sense. This really made sense. In fact, I know that United Way of Greater Portland and United Way of York County were talking about this at least 6 or 7 years before I got here, which is 9 years ago. Yeah. So it has been in conversation, and maybe, who knows, maybe even years before that. So it just made so much natural sense to do this. In those cases where it makes natural sense, I think absolutely do it. And where you can see that right now, by being separate, you're actually hindering your ability to serve community. That should be the reason to do it, is can we serve our community better if we are paired together? And I do think there will be, over time, opportunities for some of my other United Way. There are 7 United Ways in the state now. There actually were 10 when I started 9 years ago. There's 7 United Ways in the state. I do think there will be opportunities for further mergers of those as parts of the state change, morph, develop stronger connections. But I certainly wouldn't go looking for it, because part of what's wonderful for us is local. And it is a lot more work to authentically engage in a larger geography. You have to really be prepared to do that.
So what's the combined operating budget now?
We're at about a $9.5 million budget. Right. Yep.
When was that a big increase over what you
Well,
had before?
It has fluctuated. It is not the largest that the 2 combined entities have ever shared. Truth be told, all United Way's funding, our bread and butter, has primarily come from that workplace campaign, which has been largely dependent on middle-class donors giving, $10 out of their paycheck. That has been the bread and butter of United Way campaigns. Right. What we've seen nationally, not just United Ways, but all nonprofits over the last 10 or 15 years, is that we have gone from 2/3 of Americans giving to charity, and it's now less than 50% of Americans give to charity.
Why is that?
Well, I think there are a lot of factors that go into that. I think one of the factors is a less connection to community, less connection to feeling that obligation for my neighbor, and that to me is really worrisome. And I see that in obviously the political discourse that no one wants to talk about, including me right now, but that's one sign of it, is our polarization and our pulling back from seeing the broader community, a more diverse community, frankly, where we sort of all saw each other as Americans, as Mainers, as whatever town you live in, and now we're sort of more in factions. But I also see it in volunteering. People are pulling back from volunteering as well, and I have a child in high school still, and getting parents, even those things that used to seem to me to be a lot easier to get people to like come volunteer for this fair or that fair, or sit on this committee or be in the booster club. People aren't showing up for that either, and I think COVID has also definitely exacerbated. We sort of all went back to our corners during COVID.
Yeah, during COVID, people work from home.
Yep.
And a lot of your donors are from the office sector, I imagine.
Absolutely.
So that must have hurt.
It did. It absolutely did. So yes, national trend over the last 15 years, reduction in donors nationally, combined with COVID, combined with challenging economic times. People feel like they don't have as much disposable income. All of that has really hurt us. So our workplace campaign has declined in the last few years. But on the other side, there have been increases in things like grant funding and other sources that enable us. So as the very long answer to a short question, our overall revenue picture is changing and more toward grants and that type of funding and major gifts, and less toward our bread and butter annual workplace campaign.
How many nonprofits approximately does the United Way fund in this area?
That's a great question. It's somewhere around 40 or 50. I don't know that off the top of my head.
A sizable number.
It is sizable, and and just to be clear, we actually fund programs we don't fund agencies. We fund specific programs with specific outcomes at agencies. So some agencies we are funding multiple programs at.
Right.
So that number is more like 70 or 80 programs that we're funding, but I think it's within about 40 to 50 actual agencies.
So if I'm a nonprofit
Yep.
and I say, geez, I'd love to get some funding from the United Way, what do I do?
Oh, that's great. So our funding cycle really starts in the January timeframe, and we have a lot of information that goes out the end of the year and beginning of January that helps. So we have webinars and information that goes out to agencies who are interested in applying, and they can find that information on our website, which is www.uwsme, that's for United Way of Southern Maine.org. And on our website, you can find, how you sign up for those webinars, and then also some contact people on our amazing staff who will meet with agencies and tell them about, okay, here's our priorities, here's how we fund, here's where we fund, and try to assess the fit of whether that agency does fit within our parameters. Because as I said, we're about impact, and being about impact means we can't fund everything in the community that is a wonderful program. It's around some very targeted and strategic areas that we're trying to move the needle on. So some wonderful programs in the community that are doing fantastic work don't fit within the particular areas that we're trying to move the needle on. So first we want to assess, are you in the realm? And then here are what we're looking for in programs. And again, volunteers make those decisions, but our staff can really provide a lot of guidance and support through the application process.
I know a few years ago I spoke with you about a comment I received from a nonprofit saying that the process of applying to United Way was daunting, I think the word was. Has that changed or improved at all?
So yes and no. We're working really hard on the areas that we can focus on to be a more equitable organization, and that spans the gamut. And one thing that we identified, we did an equity audit last year with an outside consultant. One of the areas that we identified was that there were significant barriers, particularly for small, new organizations. And many of the organizations in our community that are led by people of color, women, immigrants, fall into those categories of the small organizations and the new organizations. And so we were inadvertently creating a system that made it much harder for them to apply for United Way funding. So we did an assessment of what could we reduce in terms of requirements for, what's the dollar threshold to have an audit? What kinds of questions do we need to ask? What type of funding streams? Do all of our funding streams have to be so rigorous related to these very specific measurable outcomes, which a small new organization has a hard time meeting because they don't have a data person who can track all the outcomes of their clients. Like that's expensive. It's difficult to do. So how do we bring people into the fold who are doing great work and help them on their journey to become more data-driven, to have those assets and resources and practices of collecting and analyzing this type of data? Like, how can we be a support on that process? So we have reduced some of the requirements within our regular traditional funding process. We've opened up other funding processes that have lower barriers in that way. But we're also extremely cognizant of the fact that we're up for election every year, as my colleague says. We don't have, some funding organizations like foundations, some of them have an endowment. They have a huge pot of money and they spend a percentage of it every year. Yep. And they have a governing body that has restrictions for how that can be spent, and they have staff who do a wonderful job of assessing that, but they don't have the concerns about fundraising. We, on the other hand, every year out of that $9.5 million budget, every year we are very lucky that my predecessors have developed an endowment that's big for a United Way, but it kicks off about $450,000 a year. So, wow. Which is wonderful, but when you are trying to get to $9.5 million every year, and we have no government contracts, no fee for service, no reimbursements that many other nonprofits rely on. They provide some sort of medical or clinical service and they get reimbursed for it. They get fee for service. They have a gym and people pay a membership to we don't have any of that. We have Greg Boulos deciding every year whether he chooses to give to United Way or not this year. And because of that, our accountability to our donors is extremely high. And we need to make sure that I can look every single donor in the face every year and say, I can assure you that your precious dollars are being put to the absolute best uses possible. And so we have so many belts and suspenders. So we're always struggling with how do we maintain the level of accountability and ensuring that they're very precious dollars. We never have enough. We have to be sure that we are spending them in the best place for the community. So we have to have a process that assesses that. Is this really the best place for that $50,000? Mm-hmm. And so as we're doing that, we have to have a rigorous process. But how do we make it so it's not onerous to the point that we're leaving great organizations out of the process? That's our constant battle.
And you mentioned you pull down $400,000 roughly a year from your endowment. How big an endowment do you have?
It's about $10 million endowment. Yeah.
So what do you pull down, 4%, is that right?
Yeah,
which is
4
about
to 5,
standard.
Yeah.
Switching a little bit subjects. So the United Way moved to 550 Forest Avenue in Portland.
Yes, we did.
With the help of the Boulos Company.
We sure did.
Which was a great experience. You move in there.
Yeah.
You unpack your bags,
Yeah.
and COVID hits.
Yeah, before we unpacked our bags.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, are you utilizing the space fully now?
We are now, but it's
People are back from home.
Yeah, so our particular in-office requirements at this point are not full-time for staff. We really have a 2-day a week. And what we talk about is it's not an in-office requirement, it's an in-community requirement. So this time that I'm spending with you counts toward my
So you only have to be in the office or work 2 days a week?
Yep, right now we do.
So you could be home 3 days a week?
You could, yep. Now, of course, people are in meetings all the time on Zoom and Teams and connecting and collaborating with people virtually, as we did for a full year. We were fully virtual for a year.
Did you see your efficiency go down?
What is
Workplace
efficiency, right? Like there's, it's really hard to assess that. What we did notice was employee engagement with each other and with the organization was reduced. And we were starting to get really concerned about that. And so that's when we said, okay, we really need to have a requirement that people are spending a significant or a measurable amount of time with each other. We've seen great improvements there in terms of collaboration. You know, those little things that bug you because you don't know someone so well, but when you do know them, you're like, oh, that's just Greg.
Oh, no, it bugs me even more. Right? I don't want to know anybody. No, I've had it. But you know, if you, I understand that work from home is here to stay.
Yeah.
But I'm not a big fan of it because how do you build company culture?
No, I agree.
If you're not in the office, or if you're a sales organization like we are.
Yep.
I mean, so much information is passed around the office when people are there, and it benefits everybody. It benefits our clients. But when you're Zooming, it's not the same.
I totally agree with you, Greg. And that was the point that I was going to make on this, is that even though we only have a 2-day-a-week requirement, at least half of our staff are spending much more than that because they want to and because they need to be effective in their jobs. And it's certain times of year. So in certain times of the year for certain departments, the work from home 3 days a week may be exactly what's needed. They're completely head down, you know, it's not very collaborative work at that time of year or whatever, very individualized. But we are seeing, so right now, in answer to your question, right now our office is being fully utilized. This morning, I was having a hard time finding a meeting room. We went to an all open office space when we moved to our new location. We don't have any offices. I don't have an office. I also don't have one of those like fake non-offices that I've seen many CEOs have, which is like a giant corner away from everybody else so that they can say they're in an open office. I don't have that. I'm like right here. I have the same size cube as everybody else.
That's actually good. I admire that.
I love it. And honestly, I was a little nervous. Like I loved the idea of it before we did it, but I was a little nervous about that, right, honestly. But now being in it, I love it. And so that means that we need these huddle rooms and little rooms so that you can have your one-on-one like this with your colleague and not disturb everyone around you and all the rest. And our rooms were fully utilized this morning. So for the first time.
Do you have to reserve them?
We didn't for a couple of years, but we sure do now. If you want a room, you got to reserve it. So it has changed a lot, and I love what it feels like right now. And this is, you know, a very exciting and busy time of year right now. We've got it's the fall campaign time for us, and we've got a lot humming along in the office. So
and the energy's
awesome.
You can feel it.
It's so great. It is so great. So, yeah, when we were coming back to the office, so my husband has worked from home this whole time that we've lived here. When we had to go to fully remote during the early COVID days, I was like, oh my God, I will never be able to work from home. And that's what I said beforehand. I never want to work from home. That would be I'd worked maybe 2 days from home before COVID hit ever in my career, right? And never want to do that. That would be terrible. And then I got used to it. And I was like, hey, this isn't so bad. And wearing my, pajamas is not such a bad thing, and all the rest. And so when it was switching back, I will say I was a little nervous about that. I was like, oh gosh, now I have to like plan an extra 20 minutes to get to the office, and I have to wear something different, and I have to, oh gosh, what if I forget my lunch, and all this stuff, right? But, within a month, like, it got back in the swing of things, and I loved it. Again, the energy, the camaraderie, the what we used to call like water cooler talk,
Yes.
but it's really just passing someone and saying, oh, Greg, do you have a second? Can I talk to you about that thing? Which never happens on Zoom, because I'll be bothering you if I just ping you or whatever.
And new employees too.
Absolutely.
How do they learn if they're not in the office?
Absolutely. And that's something we've learned too, is like onboarding new employees, you need, as their manager, you need to plan to be there the first 2 weeks for sure, every day.
Yeah, I think so.
When they're there, and get them going and all that stuff. So there are different seasons for it, but I agree with you. It's such a different feeling, and it's great.
I've always thought Maine, this is my opinion, has so many nonprofits, and my perception is that there's a ton of duplication.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also thought that communities would be better served if there was consolidation of some of the agencies, just in general. But what's your take on that?
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, I will just say that all the time, people will say, very well-meaning people who have a very strong passion in a particular area, they maybe are working in a for-profit company, and they'll say, Liz, I have an idea. Can I schedule coffee with you? And we have coffee, and they're like, I think I want to start my own nonprofit. And I'm very passionate about socks for all children, whatever, like socks. And they give me a very great story, an important story about why socks are important, and I don't disagree. You're right. Socks are incredibly important. And here are 5 other organizations that already are providing socks to children. It may not be called Socks to Children, but they're already doing, and why don't you go either get a job with them or partner with them and say, I have a different idea of how to do socks for, I'm making up this terrible analogy, but I hope you're sticking with me. And yes, your idea may be a little tweaked, that's a little different than the way they're doing it at that other agency right now. So go share that idea and say, could we work together? Can I bring my wonderful idea to your Socks for Children program? And I always encourage that, because the resources are so slim. They always have been, but right now especially, people are just, like all age nonprofits that I talk to right now, are struggling to get the resources they need to do the great work. Organizations need to focus on what they are best at, and not just because someone has a great idea. And so find an organization that's doing that. Help bring your talents, or maybe just your funding, to their Socks for Children program, and be a wonderful volunteer for it. And we do not need to start 20. Some cases we do. Some cases there really is an unmet need, and someone needs to focus on it. But oftentimes it can be in partnership with an existing organization and really strengthen the fabric of community, rather than continuing to bifurcate us into smaller and smaller chunks.
So here's the cynic in me. So you're talking in this example that you made up. You mentioned the 5 other agencies that provide socks.
Yep.
Shouldn't those 5 agencies really consolidate?
They should, if they're only providing socks. Right. And that's where it's like, one organization is providing these 5 services to children, including socks, right? So it makes sense that that's part of the offerings, that because, and this is what's different about the work that we're trying to do right now at United Way. And I'm saying this, and I hope it makes sense to you, because we are putting people at the center, not agencies. Right. It's about what people need. And if you're looking at what people need, to your point, we don't need 5 agencies. We need somebody who's an expert at this particular kind of child. Maybe it's a child who is an immigrant child, right? And they have a unique set of needs. Or maybe this is little teeny kids or high school kids. Like, those have different needs. Those have unique needs. But if we put the person at the center of the work and then we build the resources around the person, we're going to have a lot less duplication. And we're not going to be, fighting for this, not just funding, but positioning within the community that, no, it's about what's best for this discrete number of human beings. What are we doing for them, and how are we best serving them? And I think we would all be better served if we were all focused that way. And in some cases that means, and I've seen agencies do this, where they say, we are not the best agency to serve that population anymore, and we are going to close our program because we know that this person over here, and it doesn't have to be because a funder says, I'm only funding one of you, figure it out, or whatever. It's because agencies recognize that in order for us to do our best work, we have to focus, and we're going to let you focus over there. So I agree with you.
So I would think one of the challenges in encouraging consolidation, again, I'm being cynical, but let's say you get those 5 sock companies, every one of them has a president of the nonprofit, and every one of those presidents drawing a salary. And you consolidate, and you got one lucky president and 4, and I got to believe that has, in the background, keeps these agencies from consolidating.
Absolutely, and guess what? That's the same in the for-profit sector too, right?
Of course.
So there's a huge inefficiencies built in the world because of that. Yeah, and that is a reality in the nonprofit sector as well as in the for-profit. But I will say, in our case, there was no wrestling match between me and my counterpart in York County. We talked about how we could work together, what was the best way to do that. We had an appropriate plan for us to work collaboratively. And I think that can be done. It also can be done, obviously, when people are retiring or leaving. And I have encouraged, many a CEO, I think every nonprofit, this goes for mine, should ask that question when their CEO leaves. Should we actually merge with someone else? Should we actually fold into someone, or are we best serving the community by hiring another? I think everybody should ask that question.
It's a lot easier when somebody's retired.
Absolutely.
Is that the case with the other agency that you merged with?
It was not the case at the time. We were planning on working together, and then my colleague actually decided to take a different job right before the merger. So it ended up not where we didn't have the opportunity to work together. But the plan from the beginning was that we were going to work together.
So I remember when I got on the board, just before you came on, you started Thrive 27? Mm-hmm. Was it called Thrive 27 back then?
No, not when we started. We didn't have a name.
You didn't have a name. What is Thrive 27?
So Thrive 2027 is a community initiative that United Way leads as what we call the backbone organization. So we're holding it all together, but it's a community initiative to address 3 key areas over a 10-year time frame with measurable results. And those areas are giving kids a strong start, ensuring that families can thrive, not just survive, and reducing preventable premature death. So those are the 3 areas. We have very specific goals laid out within that and measurable objectives, and we have very detailed strategies below those and a lot of metrics that we're tracking toward those. But it was an attempt to really, instead of doing wonderful small pieces of work all over the community, it was an attempt to say, okay, if we as a community really focus our resources in a few key areas and we're all rowing together in the same direction toward those 3 areas, won't we have a better chance of actually achieving something that we can all see and measure as changing it for the better than if we are doing a lot of disparate, wonderful, small efforts, unconnected efforts. Exactly.
So how is it going?
It's going really well. I think the 3 areas, and what we're really focusing on right now, childcare, housing, mental health, and substance use. So those didn't seem as, and you remember this, Greg, I mean, maybe you can attest to it. When we first announced those 3 goals, they did not seem as obvious as they do right now.
That's true.
Like right now, when I say those words, nobody's saying childcare. There's an issue with childcare. Why would we care? Or homelessness, housing, what? Why is that an issue? I didn't even realize. All of those areas were not top of mind, general public aware of what was going on in our community. They were not, but where we found them was by listening. So 2,000 people participated in sharing what they saw were the big issues our community was facing. And so people saw these issues on the ground in their families, in their neighborhoods, and they were seeing them and saying, well, I'll tell you what the biggest issue for me is, housing or childcare. And through that effort, we looked at data, countywide, statewide, community data, and we looked at the voices of these 2,000 people in our community of what they said were the important issues we needed to tackle together. And we sort of did the Venn diagram thing, crossed them up, and that's how we chose those areas of focus. And we have been proven right over, and I will tell you, as the leader of the organization, I was nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, for the next 10 years, I have to work on these issues. This is what we're working on for the next 10 years. And I was nervous about that. And I trusted the process, I did, and I trusted the community. But in my head, I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this. And it's just been proven over and over again that these are exactly the right things our community needs to work on. That said, literally in 2019, and you would have seen this when you were on the board, we were showing progress on all 3 of our goals in 2019. And then COVID hit. And COVID impacted these areas. I don't know if I can say they're the hardest hit areas because I have not seen the research of all the various negative impacts that COVID had. But I sure can tell you they're on the top 10 of the list, what we're working on. The childcare crisis is real. The homeless crisis and housing in general, as we all see every day, is very real. And substance use, mental health, I think the community is talking about all of these issues literally every day at the water cooler. Someone's talking about not being able to find an apartment they can afford, not being able to find childcare they can afford, and certainly knowing a family member with a mental health challenge, or a child who really suffered during the pandemic. Those are common issues now that everybody's talking about at all income levels. And then, of course, all of those issues are impacting our most vulnerable the most. And so United Way has always been focused on the most vulnerable in our community, and so we're focusing on the right stuff. So again, a very long answer to a short question. We're absolutely working on the right stuff. I have never been more convinced of that. And it's really hard, and the data is not where we want it to be related to progress in those areas.
But up until 2019, you were making progress.
We were making progress.
And then that black swan came in.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you which of the nonprofits you support is your favorite, but I know that's akin to asking which of your 2 daughters you like the best. So I'm not going to do that. However, one of my favorite programs is 211 Maine.
Oh, great.
Right? Tell us about that program.
I'm happy to. So this falls in that other category of, this is an initiative that United Ways actually lead, and we're not, funding another agency to do this. This is our program, and all the United Ways in Maine lead the 211 initiative.
So this is statewide.
Statewide. It's 24/7. It's an information and referral hotline. So instead of calling 911 for an emergency, you call 211 for health and human services support. So what does that mean? It means any of those issues I was just talking about. So you have a friend who you believe has a substance use problem. You can call 211 and say, how do I get my friend help? You yourself suddenly find yourself, about to lose your apartment. Who do I call to help me, with eviction prevention? You have a parent who was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's and you don't know what to do. you've never been in that situation before. Who do I call? Where do I get resources? What do I do for myself and for my parent to help with that? So any of those kind of health and human that you wouldn't call 911 for, but people used to. And that's actually part of the genesis of why
frees up 911.
Frees up 911 from those kinds of calls. But it also provides a really unified approach when disaster strikes. So, recently when we were concerned about the hurricane hitting Maine, right. In those kinds of situations, 211 gets activated because that's where people will be directed to go for, shelters and things like that in those kinds of crises. Again, we don't want them calling 911 because no one's bleeding, right? But if you need a shelter during a hurricane, we want you to have a number to call that you can go to. So it's an amazing resource for our state. And it's, again, funded not only by all the United Ways in Maine, but also by the state of Maine. And they do provide a significant amount of the support for it. So that's a wonderful partnership between the state and all the United Ways in Maine. And we contract with the Opportunity Alliance to provide the call center services. They are experts at that. And that's, again, one of those, how can we partner, instead of us starting our own call center to do 211, which some United Ways have done across the country, let's work with someone who already has that skill set, who already is excellent at it. We're still going to own, manage, set the standards and the objectives of the program, but we can use the wonderful resources, talent, strengths of another nonprofit.
Is 211 in other states too?
It is. It's a nationally chartered number. And it was chartered and the rights to it given to United Ways. And so it is a national number. It covers, I think the number is, it's over 90% of the United States is covered by 211. So you can call 211 if you find yourself, if you have a parent who lives in Arizona and you're visiting them and they have an issue, you call 211 when you're in Arizona and you're going to get the local resources there to help your parent with any one of those issues that we were just talking about.
Yeah. As I said, I like that program.
Yeah, thanks.
One other program as we start to wind down here, Alice.
Yeah.
New program, tell us about it.
Yeah, Alice is really exciting. This is also a national initiative that was started by United Way of Northern New Jersey. And it now we are the 25th or something, 28th maybe, state that is joining the Alice National Network. And what Alice stands for is Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So it basically means people who are working and they are struggling to get by. And it's paycheck to paycheck every single month. And it turns out that this refers to about 40% of people who live in our communities are either below the federal poverty level, which is a completely ridiculous line, or that next group that we don't talk about. So you're not below the federal poverty level. You are in this next group. You don't necessarily qualify for any benefits whatsoever, but your income does not allow you to meet a subsistence budget with the actual real costs of what it costs to live, work, have childcare, have food in our area. And so this is a data project for the state of Maine where we will we're receiving data that tells us what is an Alice budget, a get-by budget, a survival budget in all parts of the state, because obviously that's going to be different in different parts of the state. So it tells you by local region, and it breaks it out by, okay, childcare is going to cost this much here, transportation, housing, food, all these things that are absolutely essential, right? And then you get that budget, and it tells you, okay, what percentage of people in this town, in this county, are at that income level. And we know that in southern Maine, for a family of 4, so 2 working parents and 2 kids, you need to have over $70,000 just to get by.
Combined income.
Combined income for that family of 4 just to get by. And so that's not saving for college, not saving for retirement, not Christmas presents. It's just the bare minimum of how you survive and can pay your bills. So that is some data that we're releasing and that will be available. And we are going to use that data to inform our public policy work. I haven't talked about that today, but United Way engages deeply in public policy work because that is an essential part of changing community conditions. So this will inform some of the policy objectives that we need to be suggesting, and it also will inform some of the programmatic work that we do and how we fund in communities to really target resources to individuals who are just struggling to get by.
So these are working people who are income constrained.
Correct.
And that would be, I'm guessing, like teachers maybe?
Yeah. It's
public servants?
And in the vernacular that we were all using recently to all of our frontline workers.
Yeah.
Right? So we were all using that during COVID. We know who those people are. So they're people who work in hospitals, in childcare, in our grocery stores, in our teachers. It is a huge, again, 40% of people in our state are in that category. And
paycheck to paycheck.
Paycheck to paycheck. So we have got to, one of the key areas that becomes evident for folks, and you've heard this perhaps a little bit recently, is talking about the benefits cliff, where people are eligible for certain benefits. It might be, Maine care or things like that. And then they get like a 50-cent raise.
Bumps them up. They
lose their Maine care, and now buying health insurance is just, way thousands of dollars that they aren't able to do. So those are called the benefits cliffs, where you make a little bit more and you fall off the cliff, and you are way poorer than you were before you got that 50. And we see that people refuse raises because it will put them, and so those are public policy. Like, that is fixable.
Yeah.
You can scale that and make it so everybody is aligned and incented, but it takes work, and it takes policy, and it takes people to write things down and make new rules and have different qualifications for things. And then, of course, there have to be the people behind the scenes who assess that and all the rest. So it's complicated. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's totally doable. And so how can we use this data to really impact policy and also impact programmatic work on the ground?
Switching subjects, and we're heading down the last 2 questions here. I understand George Mitchell is somebody who inspired you.
Yeah.
Probably partly because he was from Waterville.
Yep.
Of course, Paul LePage is from Waterville too.
He is.
But why Senator Mitchell?
Well, I will just say, from a distance, I always appreciated his demeanor. I always appreciated any time that I ever saw him speaking or interacted with him. It was calm and thoughtful and measured. And I really appreciate that kind of leadership. And so that was one piece of it. The second was, I think he was very effective at accomplishing, major policy initiatives and working in a bipartisan manner to get things done. He was, clearly a Democrat. He was, a proud Democrat, but he worked across the aisle and was collegial, and then, I think his international work, I've mentioned, the brokering the peace deal in Ireland was a huge deal, and I think he went on to broker a baseball.
Yes, he did.
After that too, so he was really good at the. But that skill set, that negotiator, that mediator, that person who can see both sides and treat both sides with respect, in such a way that enables them to come together and really come up with something positive. That is so admirable and so needed right now. And we don't seem to value that as a society right now very much. And I'm disappointed about that, because I do think that that's ultimately how stuff gets done. And I think ultimately we all want stuff to get done.
We do, absolutely. Well, Liz, I want to thank you.
I want to thank you
for coming on the Boulos Beat. This was very interesting.
Thank you. They were great questions, Greg. I'm really appreciative of them. And thank you so much for hosting a wonderful United Way event at your home. It was another example of how committed to community you are, and what a generous person you are. Thank you for helping us find our wonderful office space, which we love. Thank you for serving on United Way's board.
We're going to turn this into an ad.
Well, Greg, it's heartfelt. You've been a wonderful partner to United Way, and it's been terrific to work with you over these years. And I'm really glad to have this opportunity. So thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Liz, thank you for being our guest today on the Boulos Beat, a Boulos Company podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. You can learn more about the United Way of Southern Maine at the company's website, which is www.uwsme.org, on Facebook, Instagram, and X at UWSME, and on LinkedIn at United Way of Southern Maine. And if you'd like to learn more about the Boulos Company, please be sure to visit us at www.boulos.com. You can also find us at the Boulos Company on Facebook and LinkedIn, and at the Boulos Co. on Instagram and X. And lastly, if you want to know the secret to owning real estate, it's pretty simple. Just be sure to outlive your debt.